the movie of it is so ironic. It's like I'm doing the show and I'm singing songs about change, and change makes us so unhappy, but we have to change to be happy. And it's like I knew all this stuff, but I wasn't living it. And that's part of my story is like I can know stuff, but it doesn't matter if you know it and you don't live it. So I was sort of transitioning from like what I knew to, living my knowledge.
Welcome to the Funny in Failure podcast, a podcast that celebrates failure and shines the light on the emotional side of comedy, with yours truly, Michael Kahan.
My guest today is incredibly wise, insightful, and has a true philosopher's mentality. She's very entertaining and funny, not afraid to laugh at herself. Plus, she's also a really conscious human, and you can see why she's been in the business for so long. There's so much to say about this lady, so let's get into it. Beth Lapides is a comedian, writer, producer, and the host of UnCabaret. UnCabaret is a legendary alternative comedy show which has helped define the genre over 25 years ago. In short, it's a progressive storytelling show where comedians tell true stories they've never told on stage before. No rehearsed bits, no derogatory jokes, a real game changer in the industry. UnCabaret has also been adapted into an Amazon Prime series, a Comedy Central special, and 5 critically acclaimed albums. Its notable guest list includes Bob Odenkirk, Patton Oswalt, Margaret Cho, Sandra Bernhard, Kathy Griffin, Maria Bamford, Julia Sweeney, Tig Notaro, Jon Stewart, Jennifer Coolidge, Sarah Silverman, Natasha Leggero, Sam Jay, Ali Wong, and countless more. Her new book, So You Need to Decide, features conversations with comedians, writers, and cultural icons about making decisions in family, work, love, moving, and spirituality. It's part memoir, part interviews, and I highly recommend you grab a copy, so check it out in the links in the episode notes below. This is only a small snapshot of what Beth has been able to achieve, and as you can imagine, we dive deep and cover a lot, such as applying for First Lady, regrets, her new book, Living Your Real Life, yoga, Bob Odenkirk, wounds, pilots that don't get made, addictions and drinking, shame, signs and symbols. Before we get into this epic chat, if you'd like to keep up to date with the latest info regarding the podcast, follow Funny in Failure on Instagram and Facebook. I often post short clips and other cool stuff to keep you in the loop for upcoming and previous episodes. Also, if you'd like to follow me personally, I'm on Instagram and Twitter under Michael_Kahan. That's Kahan with a K. And lastly, the podcast comes out every week, 5 p.m. Mondays, Australian Eastern Standard Time. So don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on any other terrific episodes. I hope you enjoy. This could be a funny way to start.
Okay.
You have to tell me about your First Lady campaign.
Oh, wow. Okay, sure. So I ran a campaign to make First Lady an elected position. It started as a joke. I would say on stage, I would say sometimes I'm running for First Lady. Ha ha ha. Not that funny, but and then I would say, we pay her, so we should get to pick her. Let's pick her. Let's pay her. And then I had a few other, jokes about what it would be like. And then at a certain point, it just seemed like it would be funnier to do. It wasn't that funny on stage. It was a sort of a funny idea, not really that funny, but it seemed like if I did it, it would actually be in motion and would be funny and it was from a real idea, which, I mean, I do believe that. And I thought if we elected the First Lady, then it could obviously be a man, and then that would open up the presidency to women. And I just thought it's such an exactly perfect example of women being underpaid. And I thought, if we had elected First Lady, and it could, or whoever it was, the lady or man, then single people could run. I just thought it would open up the presidency, and I thought it would shine a spotlight on, the inequities. And then I thought, I started doing it, and it was a very visual campaign, and I had little suits with,
Oh, that's good.
big beehive hairdos, and I had a lot of jokes and one-liners about changing the national anthem to, smells like Teen Spirit and Que Sera Sera, and, my platform about abolishing pennies, because a penny saved is a dust collector, and changing the flag to a rainbow, and, but it was a little bit whimsical, as that time was. I think it would be very off color to do that right now. It just, the times would not hold up to it. But during that first Clinton campaign in America, there was an air of it's just a different time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you gain much traction with it?
A lot of traction. I was on CNN. I said no to Oprah.
I heard about that.
That was a mistake, but whatever. And I went to the Democratic National Convention for a small network. There was all sorts of stuff. I was in People magazine. People for like years would say, "Oh, I saw you in People magazine," and I would say, "Oh, I'm sorry. What doctor were you at?" Because
Oh, that's amazing.
so that was fun. So it was, and it was really a big deal at the time, because it still is true. I mean, it still is true. We still have to have this person who's doing all this work and can't have a job. So
Very interesting. I noticed that you said that it was a mistake rejecting Oprah. What was the story there?
I got a request to do an appearance, and I had a show that night, and I don't know. She wasn't quite as, obviously now you don't say no to Oprah, but I was coming from a point of view of not wanting to cancel a show, and I didn't see. And I think also there was another political comedian on who was very spoofy, and maybe I had some ideas about that, and I was a New York art girl transitioning into Hollywood, and I don't know that I necessarily understood you say yes to all film and television. I mean, that's not even true, but I think I didn't understand.
That's really interesting because it sounds like, and you've had it throughout your entire career, like the passion to want to like deliver to your audience. So it sounded like that was at the forefront of your mind. I find it interesting that the Hollywood mentality to a degree is screw that. Just if you got a TV or a film,
Oh,
go.
cancel the
Yeah.
show. Go do get on camera. Of course. I mean, in a way, it was I was very naive. I was a very naive young girl.
So would you have changed? If you go back in time, would you have changed it?
Yes.
Cool.
I love people who go, I would never change
Yeah.
a thing because all the mistakes I made got me to where I am right now. But you have to be in such a I'm not that far from that, but I'm not there, where you have to be in such an evolved place to be able to say everything I did got me to this place. Well, you have to have certain feelings about this place to be able to say that. I once heard Bette Midler on a late night talk show. I can't remember which host asked her, do you have any regrets? And she said, "Oh, I regret everything." And the whole audience breathed such a sigh of relief, because, I mean, it's not about not having regrets, but it is about sort of understanding. I mean, in some ways, it makes a good story, but would it have really changed anything in my life? Not, it wouldn't have. And who knows? Maybe the live show did change somebody. You really don't know what the ripples are. So I am actually okay with it. Now I would say yes, but I am totally okay with that's how things rolled.
What I got also from your book, so you needed to decide, and you had many themes in that book as well, but regrets was one of the major themes for me. And it's always so interesting as you talk about, it's always time comes into play with how we kind of see regrets. Because at the time, you don't really know what's happening. But then with a bit of time, we can kind of see with an outside perspective, and then we can kind of evaluate. It's so interesting where some people say they have no regrets, as you said, and then some people say they have regrets, but it's how we use it mentally so we don't live in the past.
Yes, learning to not live in your regrets. And I do think one of the hallmarks of, if you want to use the dreaded phrase, growing up, is that you sort of, by understanding what your regrets are, you are able to live in a different way.
Yep.
You are able to create a life that is going to result, once you start understanding the kinds of things you regret, and more often they're truly, hurting people or having been hurt, it's usually more emotional. This was a funny example we just talked about that. You start to learn temperance and patience and all the compassion and these things that make your life less regrettable.
What I had this lady on the podcast named Bronnie Ware, and I think she's an international best-selling author on the top 5 regrets of the dying. And
Oh, wow.
it is a crazy book. I brought it up on like half the podcast, but essentially she was a palliative care nurse, and she would ask people who were about to transition into the afterlife what their regrets were. And the number one regret was, I wish I lived the life that I wanted to live and not the life that I thought others wanted me to live. And
Oh, wow.
yeah. Did you get any insights from the book, and also just by you writing the book, on anything along those lines?
Well, number one, I just feel so happy right now because I have lived the life I've wanted to live. I wonder what
Amazing.
my regret will be. I wish I'd lived the life other people wanted me to live. Maybe there's no winning. Maybe whichever one you choose, it goes the other direction.
That's true, but that's more like a short term, because we think it's easier. But you're someone that's kind of seems to be that you've tried to live your best life, and yeah, you've probably made mistakes.
You know what I like to think about that? Stop trying to live your best life and just live your real life. I think your best life comes with a lot of baggage right now, or it's very Instagrammy, your best life. And your real life just doesn't look that great a lot of times. It can look very boring. It can look very messy. It can look very unorganized. It can look spiral. We have this impression of life unfolding and it's our, it goes without being too heady, we live by the clock and the calendar and time is linear, and time, I don't even know what time is, and certainly it's not linear, but we live, I mean, if ever we start to see the truth of what life, not our life, but life and reality is, it will just blow our minds. But so I guess I would say, yeah, I try to live my real life, not my best life. Sometimes I get sad about it too. I'm like, I should be living. This is my best life. I mean, look at this, look at that. Is that the best I can do in that area? Are my nails the best? My best life nails, or is my relation? Is this best life? Is this car? It's sometimes materialistic stuff, and sometimes it's, am I spending enough time with my friends? Am I, have I taken quality time off? I feel like living your best life always involves quality playtime, which I never have. Anyway.
You don't have play. I would seem from listening to your book and reading about you and hearing about you that you do have a lot of play in your life.
But it's all work. I mean, I've devised my life so that my work is playful, but it's grueling hours because I'm not plugged into any sort of, I don't have the 400. I work a lot in order to do this, and I spin a lot of plates, and I love them all, but it's a lot. And so I've tried to my partner is a little bit more adept at trying to find time off. He values it a little more. And I do take, I'm able to take breaks, but, maybe I'll make myself take a walk. And a lot of my life I've spent, I've made time on the yoga mat though for 10 years. I even worked too hard to do that. And I'm back to the mat, but does that count? Or that's also sort of ambitious,
Well, it depends. It sounds like you're quite a spiritual person as well, which I think you are. You can correct me if I'm wrong. And that it sounds like you're constantly trying to like go to the next level, whatever that may be. But that's still like taking time for yourself is still like walking and doing yoga and meditating. That's still for
I
you.
do, I will say that things fall into self-care. I do
Yeah.
take, quote unquote, that's also, we've got it. There's some words we need to replace, and
So
self-care is one of them.
what would you replace
And
it with?
um, I don't know. If I could come up with that, I'd be on a new podcast called "Why Are You So Rich?" for making up a great word.
Uh,
But another one I really, really don't like is journey. And I find I have to say it a lot, how
Same
your
as me.
journey.
Yep. I cringe
And
when I say it as well.
oh, I just loathe it. And there's not, your story. I mean, in some ways, when we talk about our journeys, we're talking about our story.
Yep.
That's almost equally as bad. So I don't know.
Well, the story's interesting because we can attach ourselves to this story of who we are, but it's often like not really true. Like we see it in real.
Oh, yeah, this is a big idea. I mean, this is something, dear listeners, that we can, write me, call me. There's the famous, I think it's Byron Katie, who said, let go of your story and release your story. And she talks a lot about that. And I really rebel against that idea because I really feel like, in some ways, your story is your gift. Like, to truly know your real story is of, if I would say, if I would ever have a regret, I mean, I think to not know when people say they didn't live their real lives, what they actually mean is they didn't know their story and they didn't live their story. You were given certain elements, and we are responsible for living a great story. We are the heroes of a story, to be courageous, to be patient, I mean, courageous, really. And courage is so important to me. And I think anything I regret would be cowardice. And cowardice is the most regrettable thing to me, because if you're courageous, courageous comes from the idea of, heart, core, from French, and acting from your heart. And honestly, when you say you didn't live your real life, I mean, that in essence is you didn't live from your heart.
Yep.
So part of that is knowing your own story, and that is a lot of what I teach, is to help people discover it's not that easy to actually know your story. So when Byron Katie says, like, let go of your story, I'm like, okay, but why don't you know what it is first? I mean, a lot of, it's like, oh, you let go of, I know what you're saying, which is this idea of, like, I mean, there comes a point in your midlife revolution, as I like to call it, where you suddenly sort of look back. You have that beautiful fulcrum where you're looking back and you're looking forward at the same time. And you sort of want to look back, and you see these lies that you've been telling yourself. You see whatever lies if you take the time in the middle to look back, you do see certain lies you've been telling yourself. It's almost unavoidable.
Yep.
And some of those lies are, the victim stories, but oh my God, we've all been done so wrong. Lordy, Lordy, Lord, have we been? I've done so wrong, and we love our victim stories. I mean, they're so fun, and we get sympathy. But once you release the victim story, unfortunately, the hero's journey looks so little like the hero's journey of Joseph Campbell, and especially most for women and anybody who's an outsider. It doesn't look like this warrior path that we've been told. And it can be very cyclical, and it can be very erratic, and can be very, very different. But if you take the time in the middle to figure out what are the gifts you've been given, because if you've been given your own story, then you have then a responsibility to live that story. So who you are, I mean, a lot of times I'll talk to people and they just don't even know what their story. I always think of it like this. So you have a lot of stories, and they're like pearls. And everybody knows their best stories. If we sat next to you at the dinner, you would know your best story. Tell me your best story. Oh my God, isn't he, such a charming storyteller? Best story. But then you have this bowl of these stories. But unless you have the thread that you can put the this individual beads on. You don't have a necklace or a mala, or so I call it your own personal sutra, which is a little like woo woo, but I'm sorry. Oh, I'm not allowed to say I'm sorry.
Not-
Well, I apologize to the to the listeners if that's too woo. But sutra is the yogic word, but we use it in medicine too. When you get a wound is sutured. It's a thread that ties the wound together. So whether you're in therapy and you look at your original wound, or whether you're doing program work, or whether you're just a storyteller, these wounds are what's interesting. I mean, wounds are the greatest. If you're not wounded, what do you have? Nothing. So, and I direct people to trees. Trees are if you look at a plank of wood, the knot, which is where your eye goes, because it's the most interesting thing on the plank, is where there was an infection and the tree grew around it. So, these are the interesting things. And so your wounds, your story. So anyway, the sutra, your own personal sutra, what is that thread? And I don't know what that.
No, I know exactly what you're saying. I think the moral is that everyone has a story, and it's kind of up to us to know what's kind of happened in our life, to figure out what's been going on, and then to see, like, through my perspective, an outside lens, what are the things that are happening in our life that aren't best serving us, in a sense. And not to like feel the shame of, which is very easy to say on my high horse over here, but not to feel the shame of like some of these inverted commas negative experiences, and see how they've actually hopefully allowed us to blossom in other areas.
Oh yeah. Well, this is your podcast, right? This is what it is. And it's a great endeavor, because yeah, the whole, it's not a challenge, it's an opportunity. And I mean, you don't go from high point to high point. It was great when I talked to Bob Odenkirk in this book. I was like, I don't know if it made it into the book, but in our conversation, I was like, well, in your career, it's just been so, I don't, and he was like, have you looked at my IMDb? I mean, there's a lot of stuff on my IMDb that is not Better Call Saul,
Yeah.
and that's true of everyone, but we tend to remember the things that hurt. Our brains are wired for the negative, and that's because it's more interesting.
It's an interesting perspective. I have 2 points on that. I think it was probably one of my favorite bits in your book was how Bob Odenkirk was talking about transformation, and how he's done many different people. You can just get the book. It's in the episode notes. But without saying the whole story is how that he's constantly tried to challenge himself in a sense to transform and grow his craft. And he was talking about leaving Saturday Night Live, and then he's done a few other things. And then it was still very nerve-wracking for him to get Better Call Saul, but then making that transition into being an action star, which is like crazy, because look, I don't know what's gone in his life, but people tend to box you in this industry and see you as the one thing, and can be nerve-wracking. And he's also got that comedy DNA, or those bones, and it can be scary where he doesn't kind of have that to fall back on. And I just found it really remarkable how he's constantly, at least through that arena, tried to transform himself to grow.
Yeah. I mean, and he's been fortunate that he's had those opportunities, as I think he'd be the first person to say. That's how you stay alive. You just can't, you have to figure out ways to keep challenging yourself.
It also sounds though with you, and we can literally talk about this for a year, like no joke. You've also gone through like radical transformation, and I don't know like timelines, and I don't know everything that's happened, so you navigate it how you want. But I think it was like 12 years ago, you went through mass transformation. It was so much. Yeah, okay, what do you say like that?
No, finish your question.
I don't even know anymore. What you said, it was interesting how I think a few things at the time you would have viewed them as potentially have gone wrong, whatever that means. But how you decided to kind of, I don't know if the cliche words, like lift yourself and decide to like move forward and do a lot of work on yourself and grow. Yeah, maybe I'll just get you to talk about that time and why you decided to like grow and move forward and pursue.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sure. In some ways, no choice. I mean, in some ways, there was a period of time. I mean, the funniest way of telling what it was I had been sort of avoiding talking to my mom on the phone because it was all such a nightmare. And who wants to talk to your parents like that? But at one point she called and I just felt like, "Ugh, I better pick up the phone." And she started with the rundown of how everything was. It was like, how's the show going? I think we're closing. What's happening with your house? I don't know, maybe foreclosure, or we're not sure. How are you doing with money? Not good at all. Maybe bankruptcy. What's going on with, and she named my then husband, and I said, I don't know, we may be getting divorced. And then, of course, there was total silence.
I think you can laugh.
And then I said, well, as long as we're talking, I may as well tell you, I quit drinking. And she said, now? With everything going on? Do you really think this is the best time for that?
Oh, that's amazing.
And, I think there's a thing in medicine called cluster headaches. I'm just thinking about that. I don't know why that popped into my head, but it was sort of like that. It was sort of, you hit a bottom, and it's not necessarily like all these things happen because I was drinking, but certainly it goes, you know, a lot of times we use because we're feeling disconnected, and we use whatever substances we use because we long for connection. And and things got painful and I didn't necessarily want to feel them. And when I stopped drinking, I just was like really feeling everything, and it all happened at once. And in some ways I get jealous of people who just are like, they go to rehab and they just, they quit. Oh, I don't know. They did some drugs and then they went to rehab, and then they came out and they moved back into their house, and there was a relation. I was like, God, that looks so fun. I wish I went to rehab and had a month of just group therapy. That would have been great. Um, but it was such an amazing time because it was so raw. And I used to listen to that Natasha Bedington song, Unwritten, a lot. And I felt, what happens is you feel, or for me, what happened to me is I had lost hope. And I think if I could say what happened, it was the rebirth of hope in my life that really was the subject of that story. And in fact, after 9 months, a friend gave me a card that was like, oh, I was going on tour and it was the first tour, and I was nervous, and for a lot of very particular and good reasons. Even in retrospect, I had good reason to be nervous. And the front of the card had a street sign, and one street was hope and one street was it said, one way. And I said to her, I don't believe in hope. Hope is about the future, and it's the hope that'll kill you. And I'm a yogi, and I believe in the now. It's all about the now. And she said, all right, well, anyway, here, congratulations on 9 months and good luck on the tour. And, I kept this card and I moved around a lot in those years. There were 2 years of really being, learning faith, let's just say. And I, wherever I went, I took this card and I would put it up, where I could see it. And then I got an offer to do a show, and I went down to the venue, and I went with my my new partner, and the guy was like, okay, well, what do you want to do? And I started spinning some, yarns about what show we were going to do. And then Mitch looked at me and he was like, well, let's do Uncabaret. And I was like, no, 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 no. I'm not doing Uncabaret. That show is dead to me. I'm never doing that show again. But I couldn't really think of anything else. And then Mitch was like, everyone loves Uncabaret. You haven't done it in a while, and I had taken like a hiatus. It had been while I was doing this other show, 100% Happy, 88% of the time. And that was the show I was doing while my whole life fell apart. So it's so beautifully, like, the movie of it is so ironic. It's like I'm doing the show and I'm singing songs about change, and change makes us so unhappy, but we have to change to be happy. And it's like I knew all this stuff, but I wasn't living it. And that's part of my story, is like I can know stuff, but it doesn't matter if you know it and you don't live it. So I was sort of transitioning from like what I knew to, living my knowledge.
Oh, that's awesome.
And finally we said, we'll do UnCabaret. Anyway, we left the venue, and I suddenly realized, like, oh my God, this venue is on the corner of First and Hope Streets. And then I turned around and I saw the venue was actually called First and Hope. And yeah. So I believe in that. I'm a believer, I'm believing that kind of stuff.
Same.
And
It's crazy when
uh,
there's these
it is
iterations.
crazy. So but it's really during that time I really, had messages written in lipstick to myself all over my, on every mirror, and I still write to myself on mirrors with red lipstick, but I, there's I love the unknown. There's more God there, and I tried to really start to get comfortable with being uncomfortable, and I cried a lot, and I kept crying, and I kind of thought I'm never going to stop crying, and I just got okay with that. I was like, well, if this is this the new you? All right, I guess you cry a lot. Bring your mascara with, and I got sneaky about going places and so people wouldn't know, and hiding it, and feeling kind of ashamed about it, and pushing forward anyway, and then trying to learn to do comedy in this new body that was, it's very hard when you're making a big change to get on stage as a person who's you're still, Uncab especially is so much about the now, but any great comedy, you have to be honest with the audience. And in order to be honest with the audience, but you need to know yourself so much better than the audience knows you, because the audience doesn't want to do any work. They're exhausted from their job.
Yep.
So, you've got to say, this is who I am. This is what's happening. And when you're in the middle of a transition, that's very hard, because you're really like, are you interested in looking at fog? Because that's what I am right now. I'm a transitional being. So hosting was actually a gift to me at that point, because I didn't have to be quite so. There are things you just don't want to tell an audience. There's not, you want to be, I want to be honest with an audience, but there's no need to burden them necessarily with your, chazarai, as we would say.
Yeah. But also with that, like processing it and then being able to talk about it as well. But also, I didn't quite realize this until you said it, that you were doing UnCabaret for so long, which is a unique alternative style of like comedy. And I'll talk about it in the introduction so people are familiar with it. And you've been doing that for, and you can also tell us about it as well.
1,000 years.
1,000 years. So this was kind of like your bread and butter. You're known in the industry. You have the biggest names coming here as well. It's a crazy type of show where there's like truth telling and it's storytelling. And then you're kind of moving away from that while you're going through all of these experiences as well. And now it sounds like you're doing like a one-woman show, which is probably more stand-up, maybe. Well,
It was the story about being evicted and moving to the desert, and, rediscovering myself in the desert, and what is change and what is happiness, and it had music in it, original music, and it was a slideshow. And
oh, that's so cool.
It was super cool. It was about angel healings and back pain, but in it, I'm with my then husband, and while we were doing the show, we were breaking up. So that's why I say it was kind of like a movie.
It's really interesting in that sense, is that you've been doing something for so long and perhaps there's a little bit of a comfort zone, and now you're going through all of these experiences and doing something else, which as a performer would be very nerve-wracking. But something I wrote down, and you mentioned at the very start of the podcast, is that being courageous is very important to you. And I think that is also being very courageous in a sense, is like stepping to the side, or not to the side, stepping in your direction so that you can, I don't know, like unleash yourself to be, inverted commas, the best version of yourself. But also something that I took note of is to stop the drinking, because that could be very easy when you're going through all of that. And they say divorce is the hardest thing, and then you've got like 5 other things, and it's also like a divorce of your child being UnCabaret.
Yeah.
It's amazing that despite all of that, you still wanted to like feel it and be in it when you're at your lowest point. Why? Tell me your secrets. Give them to me.
Part of it was ego. Like, I just sort of felt like I wasn't quite as successful as I should have been. We're a show about success and failure. I couldn't quite figure out why. And I was kind of tricked into not drinking, honestly, if you want to know the
Never
truth.
heard that before. Tricked into not drinking. Normally goes the other way around.
Somebody invited me, this, a new person who I had, who I had a sparkle in my eye for, it invited me to come to sober yoga. And I was like, that sounds like a meeting. And he was like, no, it's not a meeting. It's just regular yoga. And I was like, because really, sober yoga just does really sound like a meeting. And he's like,
Yeah.
it's not. And it's at your, favorite yoga place. And it wasn't just my favorite yoga place. It was like featured in the show. It was like I needed to live near my yoga place. And it's just the comedy of the show is that because I couldn't live near enough to it in Los Angeles, I ended up moving to Palm Springs, which is, 2.5 hours away. So it was ridiculous. And anyway, I went and it was a meeting, and afterwards I was like, I don't think I'm an alcoholic, but I do like those people. And I like the ideas. A lot of the ideas were ideas that I was already talking about. And then I asked if it was an intervention, and he said, I don't know, was it? And I thought, well, you know what? If I could just stop, it's no big deal. And then I thought, like, the next day, I was like, wow, I really do want a drink. Like, I noticed now I do really want it. And then I sort of went to pour a drink, and I just noticed, like, it's sort of at a very visual thing where I saw this drink in between me and everything else. And I thought, what's behind that drink? I must want something else really badly. I can't even see because the drink is right there. Because I keep indulging this small want. I think I'm missing something bigger.
Yep.
And then once I started, I did also think, oh, maybe this is the thing that's been holding me back. And I knew how hard it was going to be. So that kind of appealed to me because, courage. And I had never thought I wasn't like also look, if you're friends with Andy Dick or he's in your circle and, your idea of what an alcoholic is like driving into tree trunks and, getting arrested. And that was not my story, like, at all. And, I'm here to say to anyone who thinks that their life is just not quite what it should be, that you're taking the edge off all the time, that edge is where your life is. That is where your real life is. And it had never occurred to me that my kind of, I don't want to call it casual drinking because it was persistent, but it wasn't. I mean, I don't remember. I mean, I never blacked out, and there's a lot of things that, I never ended up in I was never arrested, and I was never this, and I was never that. But especially women are often not those kind of drinkers. You don't have to be that kind of drinker for it to be kind of ruining your life.
Mm.
Not sure. Was there another question that I didn't answer?
No. This is really interesting. So when you're holding that glass, did you decide to just stop there and then?
I did. I decided I was going to stop for a year. I thought a year would do it. I thought, really, you know what? If I can stop for a year, then I'll be fixed. And I don't know why I needed to say that to myself. Like, I kind of just thought, okay, like, in a way it makes sense. Like, get through a year, circle of life, see where you are in a year. But then because I fell apart so hard in that year, and during that year also, I would imagine I started to also see like it as a kind of success getting through that year. Like, getting through the year would be a success that I would have while all these other things were falling apart. So it became a kind of goal, and um and I started to unearth my story. I mean, it also appealed to me as a storyteller. You do a rigorous inventory of your life, and you're rigorously honest. I love that word, rigor, and what your story is, and there is a thing in recovery, whether you're doing a 12-step program or you're in some sort of group therapy, or whatever you're doing. If you're reassessing your life, there is a lot of storytelling in it, and that appealed to me. I loved that idea, and I love the idea of service that was part of it. Anyway, I started to imagine during that year that I was kind of crossing a river. I would sort of close my eyes and I'd imagine that I was crossing this river. And some days on that river, I was very sure-footed, and other days on that river, I was slipping over moss-colored rock. I don't know. I was slipping and sliding, and some days it was working. And when a year was up, I did shut my eyes and I saw that I had gotten to the other. I've never really had an experience like this. It wasn't like I was making this up. I like just these images would come to me, and I shut my eyes and I saw that I had gotten to the other side of the river. But what I hadn't anticipated at all was that it was a completely different landscape. Like, I just sort of thought it would be like, one bank, the right bank of the river, and I'd get across the river, and the left bank, and it would be like what it was on the right bank. And now it was Technicolor, and it was crazy, and I had no way I didn't know how I'd navigate it. And, once I got successfully through that year, it was, I was like, oh, I see. It's just, one day at a time for the rest of your life. But if you're lucky,
So when you saw that new, like the different colors and everything, is that because you had put in this effort to consciously grow and move forward and succeed, that this new image had grown? Is that what I'm hearing?
I think so. I was a different person, and certainly, with unsullied eyes, you see the world, you see things, all sorts of things. I saw all sorts of things that I had never seen. For one thing, there's a, urge to become a little less self-centered, she says, as she continues talking about herself. Um, well, with the hope of helping others. uh, I am in Hollywood and I am a performer, but, to see others and to see the world more fully, I will just say that. To see the world was more available more fully.
You mentioned the word hope and how you'd lost it, and then you're on the corner of, what was it, First and
Hope, yeah.
First and Hope. You kind of need to be open to see like a sign, if you want to call it a sign like that as well, because there might be a lot of signs when we're going through, I'm just speaking from my experience, when we're at a low point, but we might not be able to see it. But you were still able to see it and allow it to have such profound.
My story was filled with signs. And so the show, the 100% Happy show, was 100% happy 88% of the time, was all signs and symbols. That's from sort of a literary point of view, and some woo-woo, and there were birds, and I
like woo-woo. Speak woo-woo.
Just all sorts of, I went outside one day and there was a bird, and then it's too long. Sorry. Anyway, I have determined though how to determine. I have determined how to determine if something is a sign or just a thing, and that has to do with how loud it is. And when I say loud, it can be either loud, sometimes actually audibly. I've heard things that are like, God speaking, or or it can be loud because it's a repeated thing, or it can be loud because it's very out of place, or it can be loud in any ways like that, proportionally loud. And when you tune in like that, it becomes really interesting. I noticed I haven't had a sign lately about anything, and I was like, it's time for a sign of, sometimes, obviously you're looking for signs more when I didn't really get to talk about this in the book. There's so much to say about decision making. At some point when I was living in the desert, somebody taught me how to use the pendulum. Had a guy come and do a thing that was called God stressing, like not God like God, like geo, like the earth, de-stressing. And I had a lot of the story is about back pain and how you like getting rid of the back pain, and how it led me to all these different healers. And
that's what happened with me.
Oh yeah, back pain is like right. Yeah. And each healer then ended up with a story. But anyway, this one guy said, oh, you know what you need this guy to come do this guy, you have to call JP. I was like, well, what does JP do? This was a masseuse, and the masseuses always are like a gateway to the crazies. And he's like, he is like, oh, God, I don't know what he does. He's like a house whisperer. Just call him. So I called JP, and he goes, how about if I come at 4 a.m.? I like to travel by night. That way I'm harder to track. I was like, how about like noon? How about if you come at noon? So he
Happy
comes at
medium.
noon. He's like got a Volvo station wagon just filled like with every survivalist like tents and pots and pans, but also like cartons of Marlboros. And it's just like, and so he takes out divining rods and he starts I don't even know what he's doing. And he starts like using divining rods. He's going to map the property, he says. So he starts using these divining rods and they start spinning. And I'm like, whoa, that's can't be real. And then he says, oh, I'll show you. And he gives me my own little divining rods and I feel it really being real. And then he's like going around the property and mapping the property. And then he goes, he's in like the bedroom and he's like, oh, you have a Stargate in your bedroom. And I was like, obviously that I knew. And, 3 vortexes on the property. And then he ends up like putting these copper wires around the property. And and I have to say, when he finished, it did feel better. It was sort of like, I would always say, it was sort of like Spanx for the property. It like just held it in. And people would come in. Also, there was this really beautiful chair. And he said, I bet no one ever sits in that chair. I was like, no one ever does sit in that chair. He said, when I'm done, people will sit in that chair. And people did start sitting in that
Wow.
chair. And then I would tell them about JP, and he'd go, I need his number. And people would try to call him, and he was never, ever, no one could ever reach him again. It was like as if he wasn't even real, or was he magical, or did they get him? I mean, we don't ever know what happened to JP. Why did I start telling this story? Oh my God.
We were talking about signs and
Oh, signs. Oh my gosh. Anyway, I don't know. That happened.
we had I've just moved homes and we have had a similar experience with our painter, and our painter completely transformed the house, and you can feel it in the
Wow.
air. It's like crazy. It's like they're angels. It's like a human form of an angel. That's so
Very
cool.
nice.
So
Very nice.
were you always, I don't know if whatever label you want to call yourself, were you always spiritual? I know you come from a Jewish upbringing, and through my experience, there was no spiritual understanding, but I guess that could be in my school or my environment. It sounds like you've had to actively through yoga, and it sounds like you meditate and very
Yes.
intuitive.
I mean, in my quest, I'll just say I have circled
Better than
back.
Journey. I like
Yes,
Quest.
it was
Yeah.
better.
Yeah.
Quest leads you to questioning, and that, and we love a question. If there's anything I could say is that, a takeaway for the listeners that I try to remind myself all the time is like, life is not about answers. It's like, really love the question. And I don't always live that. I mean, I consider myself a recovering know-it-all, and I love an answer. And as a comic, that is also hard because answers are hilarious. If you're like, if you have a lot of opinions, that's all it can be. Anyway, with the Jewish thing, my grandfather, my mom's dad was very devoted to the shul, and when he died, it was like Yom Kippur, just packed, and he was one of the minyan. And so I had an example, though. If he had lived to be older, I would have liked to have talked to him about it, which I never, had the opportunity to. And a lot of moral stuff, I think, more than religious stuff in my Jewish background. And in some ways, to be our generation Jewish, it was so post it was, the Holocaust just hovered, and I always think of myself as like a never forget you. I mean, it was just, that was the main thing I was taught, like, never forget, just never forget, never forget. And I rebelled against that idea, and I think I rebelled against that idea with, I mean, I'm interested in every idea about remembrance and forgetting. And I think one thing that attracted me about, the new, I came to LA as a New Yorker, and I was very skeptical about all the, all this stuff. And, I could tell you that story in another episode. It's too long a story, but when I landed finally, and I thought of, finally, when I embraced like be here nowism, I would say, I kind of vacillated because you still are who you grew up. And so I always was like, never forget, be here now, never forget, be here now, never forget. How about never forget to be here now? That'll be it. Never forget to be here now. That's what, and that was like And I would say, like, there's a very fine line between an altar and a shelf full of tchotchkes. And I really think that that line is where I live. But I have to say that in, my new agey woo woo, yoga, whatever, I found the strain of Judaism that's Kabbalistic, and there is like a transcendent Jewish, very new age. I mean, as it turns out, Mazel of Mazel Tov means flow. I had a friend whose father was a Kabbalistic rabbi who taught me that,
Oh, that's
and
very cool.
and 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 so there's a lot of connections, and I did the work myself. I mean, my family's not. Yeah, I did that work all. Yeah, I'm always doing that. I mean, I could be sequestered in a rabbinical way. I mean, stand up. I mean, to me, it is a spiritual quest. You're on stage. You're connecting with an audience. It's a congregation. A lot of what great stand up is about is a very spiritual experience, that laughing together, the higher, to get to that higher vibration. It's one reason I like to do shows where there's live music also, because it helps to raise the vibration. And music and comedy are so closely connected, because it's interesting, because comedy, everyone who knows about comedy knows it's the K sounds. It's the first thing they teach. First stupid rule. It's like hard consonants is where you get. That's why we have dick jokes and not penis jokes.
Oh, I actually did not know that. No one's brought that up before.
Oh, all right. Well, it's like a hacky rule of comedy, and music is all vowels. I know. I learned to sing for. If you want to talk about mistakes, the New York Times, when I was a young performance artist doing one-person shows and touring them, the New York Times came and they were like, she's really one to watch, and this was, amazing, because I was 22 or something, but there was one line in the review that was like, mistakenly she attempts to sing. And
Oh,
and they didn't say any more about it than that. But that line,
yeah.
that does stick. So then I just, but slowly but surely, I just couldn't resist. And anyway, I ended up working with, actually learning to sing well enough to sing in a show. So I was again tricked into that, I think. But what I learned when I actually spent some time, trying to get good enough to sing a modest amount of songs, singing is in the vowels. Singing is all vowels. It's all vowels. Barely, if you actually listen to singers sing, it's like there's barely, they just grace the consonants. And so it was like, so with singing and comedy together, you get the whole alphabet. So it's kind of great.
Oh, that is very cool. On a side note, I think it's so cool that you found the Jewish Kabbalah mysticism. I've been banned through one of the schools here in Melbourne, which is hilarious.
You've been banned?
I've been banned. It's a long story, but essentially because I always liked that stuff. I've always been interested in like mysticism and like Joseph Campbell's books and stuff like that. And someone said, why don't you just go to like his talk and see if it's for you? And he gets up on stage with like, I don't know, 30 to 50 people trying to like sell his type of Kabbalah school. He gets up with a straight face and says, I've got nothing to work on. I've done it all. And everyone just burst out laughing. And with no straight face, I'm being serious. I'm like,
oh my God.
Yeah. I was like, I didn't know that people like that existed.
What about humility? What about humility? Oh my God.
Because I really like when people talk they're about service. And he's like, no, I'm just here to help everyone else. Like, I'm not too sure about that. And then essentially through talking to him, and he was trying to manipulate me and a friend, and we called him out on it. And yeah, he was a bit of a...
Yeah, there's a lot of hucksterism in that area too. I mean, I once tried to go to synagogue because my mother-in-law died, and she was, and I wasn't with her, and I thought, I went to the Kabbalah Center, and they were like, oh, are you a member? Have you paid? Are you, and then I told them, they were like, all right, come in. But then I don't know, it was very, yeah.
Yeah, it's weird. I'm definitely open to it. I just wouldn't go through that guy. I think there's some really
Yeah.
interesting teachings. I just can't believe
Amazing. You know what? Every organized religion, it's not just, I don't want to,
Yeah.
it's not Judaism. It's every organized religion is, there's confoundation with religion and finance. And I don't know that it's even solvable because churches need money to survive.
Exactly.
So what do what do you do?
It's a fine
Do you,
line.
it's a very fine line. On the one hand, you have money. On the other hand, God, clap your hands, you're praying, you know.
On the service note, I know that you do workshops and you do private teachings.
Hmm.
I found that very interesting because it's something that you don't speak about as much. I'd like to know like why you do that. Is this also to be of service as well in a sense? Because you've obviously got a lot to give for
I
your
don't talk about it because I always think of it as the second thing. And I do it, I started doing it the same. I mean, I'm not that altruistic, but I do like that part. I mean, I like anytime say something and somebody laughs makes me happy. I like to be able to clarify I happen to be very good at that. And I am able to clarify people's work for them and help people see their stories and know what they should do. And I'm not afraid to tell people the truth about what I really see.
Oh, that's so good.
I'm not overly, but I'm not mean about,
Yeah.
I actually want to help people. I just really, when I'm doing it so that you can make progress and fulfill your highest, the highest level of your achievement that is possible. And so I'm happy to just say yes or no, or you should do this, or why don't you do that, or ask a question. Anyway, blah, blah, blah. But I started doing partly people were asking for a workshop because at that time, I mean, we started doing UnCabaret so long ago that there was no system for coming up. There was no place to go. I mean, if you wanted to do the improv, you do some open mic nights, you do this, you do that, you develop, and then eventually, you work up to an audition spot and, there's a system to come up in. There was nowhere to do the kind of work. I mean, the people who started UnCab were already doing, HBO One Night Stands and had been on TV, and Bob quit SNL and came to do UnCab. It wasn't like people starting out figuring it out. So there wasn't like a system for people who wanted to do only this. And so there was sort of, there was requests like, isn't there somewhere we can learn to do this? Could you have like an UnCab lab? And a girl needs to make a living. So, there's a need and I have an ability and there you go. And thus began a 20-year
Ooh,
project.
that is very cool to hear. Do you see like common themes with people? I know everyone's unique, but maybe there's something that someone's always coming with or something like that.
Gee, common themes. I mean, there are certain areas. I mean, young performers need to really process their childhoods and parents and family. That material needs to get done if you're going to really be any kind of performer. You kind of need to know that story. And I don't know, I see people as unique. There's different areas. There's certainly, the love and breakup stories. There's family stories. There's, one of the things about the book was, I picked this idea, so you need to decide because I wanted to find an area that I knew people had a lot of good stories in. I knew I wanted the book to be partially my story, and I knew I wanted to talk to people. I value conversation so highly as an art form, and
Awesome.
I wanted to have conversations with people that were juicy, that people really wanted to talk about this stuff. And because we were headed into another election, there's like election 2020, I sort of, so, they always say like decision 2020. It's like part of the election thing, decision 20, And so that word decision was kind of being around, and I kind of saw it, like it just sort of stuck. And I was like, yeah, decisions. This is big. This is very, very big. And then the things in the book, family, love, spirituality, moving, and work. This handful of things are probably where most stories live. When I was a radio host, there was a consultant who told me, people only care about three things, Beth. They only care about pop culture, fame and pop culture, and money and, family. Those are the only things people care about. And I was just like, ah. And, it's not 100% wrong, actually, but it drove me crazy. Anyway, yeah. So the teaching, that's one thing. And I will say, it's funny in terms of performance, because we've moved the classes into Zoom format away from being live. It's become a little bit more about writing during this time than about the performing part of it. But I will say, I noticed, for instance, I very rarely will like genderify an idea, but men, when they get nervous, will get really flat. Like when I talk to, with beginning performers, it'll get really flat. It's like suddenly there's just us like super monotone. It's like they're very like that. And women, when they're nervous, it gets very high. But knowing that is, you can definitely adjust. And I think mostly I would say I notice people just not sticking with what they know is big and running too fast from the biggest things. And one of the things I'm able to do for people is say, stick with this. Like, don't run so far. Don't run so fast. Just let's stay here for a minute. But this is why, it's like a meditation practice. Just, can you sit with it and be comfortable? Can you sit where you're uncomfortable and just stay there? And, and that's a real thing. People need listeners. It's very hard to know your best stuff, on your own. It's why, it's why we perform. It's, you do your material and the audience will tell you what your best material is. Believe me, the audience is a great teacher.
Okay, I've written down, I think, 100 points, but one thing we glossed over, and I think I haven't never said this out loud, so we'll see where we go, is unpacking your childhood, you said. And I think that once we kind of realize that, we realize why we're doing these things, why we're performing in a certain way, why we're writing. And although we might never like fully figure it out, but that that quest of understanding of who we are and what we've gone through really, well, at least for me, has helped unleash my creativity. But without that, I wouldn't have been able to do it. I'm glad that you put that to words for me. It's something I'm going to be thinking about as well for a long time.
Well, a lot of mothers will tell you that children come in fully, I didn't, it didn't happen during your childhood. You came in that way. And there's something to that too. There's something to just honoring who you are, but that can get clouded over, and who that is shapes your, I don't think your childhood necessarily shapes your story. Sometimes who you are shapes your childhood.
Yeah.
It's not, it's a little more complicated. It's like, the Russian dolls, you can keep going back in, but something like that.
That's a great take. I also, about your book, I found it brilliant in how you had all of these amazing performers, or whatever you want to call them. I know you've spoken about this 100 times, so we'll try and make it more kind of interesting. But what made you pick like those topics? And then how did you actually figure out how to collate between, because it's an audio book, which is a great idea. How did you decide how to do it, how to structure it, what things speak to you more than others?
Well, there were honestly a couple of other topics. Well, as I said, just, I was looking for ideas that I knew there would be a lot of stories in these 5 ideas. I also thought there would be some stories about friendship, and I thought there would be some stories about buying like stuff, like the decisions we make about, the things we get. And it's interesting, nobody had stories about the things that I think that we spend so much time on those decisions, and it ends up being like not of any interest after it's over. Like you do it and it's not interesting. You're just a consumer. You're not like even a person. You just, there was nothing. I mean, I thought maybe buying houses, or there would be some joy of car. I don't know, the big purchases or jewelry, or, I thought the engagement ring. I just thought there were like big. I maybe your favorite shirt. I could actually think of a lot of stories about buying things that there were stories around. So, but people do not want, which I sort of thought was like great. Like, oh, people are just think it's shallow, or they don't want to tell those stories. And the friendship one, I think, was too. I mean, people are so vulnerable in this book. I mean, people have shared so from their heart and I think friendship, it's almost still a taboo. The ending of a friendship is very tender still.
Yeah.
Who ghosted who and why it ended, and one person changed and the other didn't. Sometimes it's about money, sometimes it's about loyalty, and I think we still have loyalty to our ex-friends if it went badly, especially, and people didn't want to talk about that. It was really interesting. But I knew that these areas would have, yeah, I knew that there would be big stuff in these areas.
We've spoken about this a little bit on the podcast, but it's something I'm trying to like figure out as I grow and evolve about friendship breakups, because there is that loyalty aspect as well. We don't quite have a terminology. We don't quite have like the labels in society. It's like you break up with your partner, or like maybe an agent, and that's still apparently quite hard. I've never had an agent, but the friendship breakups and the loyalty, that just because we've been friends with someone for a certain amount of time doesn't mean we need to be friends with them later. Like some people go in their different paths, and that's okay.
Right.
Maybe some things happen. But I've always found it so interesting how it just seems to be kind of like a blank note that just we don't go near it.
Yeah, it's really, I heard somebody once say a reason, a season, or a lifetime. And that's not quite it either. And I think maybe Facebook has, or social media in general changed it, because you can like reconnect with people, but that loss of it's intimacy. I mean, it's about intimacy. It's not any friendship you care if it ends, but it's those people that, I mean, it is an ex in a certain way,
Yeah.
but the breakups happen differently, because with an ex, I mean, it's very obvious that you're breaking up. A lot of times with friends, there's a fight or a sour note, but then you kind of keep trying, and then it kind of fades, and then you see them at a party, and are you still friends? And, are you really still friends? Does a friendship ever end, or does it just go quiet? It's just very tender. It's super tender, and very few people. There are also friendships that, many of us have decided, I'm not going to be friends with that person anymore. They're too negative. I don't want that person in my life anymore. And how do you say to someone, you're too negative? So, or you don't share a belief system with somebody else anymore. These things
That's
happen.
very common. But with the negative thing, I've had to do that in the past, and I definitely have not handled it well, because you're right, it's so sensitive. You can't go to a negative person and be like, you're too negative, stop being negative, because it'll make them more negative. And then
Right.
like what I've done, which is definitely, this is many years ago, I definitely didn't handle it. You just kind of like slowly ghost. So then on their end,
Yeah.
they're like, what's just happened? Is this person not being there for me as a friend? And it's been, I've seen it with other people. It's very hard to navigate because we don't have like the terminology, I'm ending this friendship. I don't want to be around.
Yeah. So it sort of it doesn't, yeah. I think it's a very awkward thing, because I think friendship has become more important in the past, whatever. I think it grows in importance in our world as family becomes different. The decisions around friendship, especially as, less people, there's a diminishment in childbearing, and change in single parenting, and, social structures are less around family and the job, and, there's more freedom in your kind of support structure. So friends become a kind of family, and, with your family, you cannot like them, and they're sort of still your family, but it's very hard to figure out the friends that's true with. I once, my ex once said to me, you're so negative for a positive person. And I said, no, I'm not.
I've got a question on that, because it sounds like, and also through listening and hearing about you, is that you've actively changed your outlook in that regard, going from negative to more positive. I know that it's a quest, and that we don't
It is
just
a
change
quest.
overnight, but that
No.
through my experience, it has massive rewards.
Well, it's a very fine line. We live in a very challenged world, and there's obviously very dark forces, and one doesn't like to feel like a Pollyanna. Nevertheless, one also begins to understand that the mind creates life in some way. In some way. I'm not saying you think I live in a mansion and then suddenly you live in a mansion. But, there is everything is waves, and thoughts are kind of wave, and waves create reality. And, when I first heard the idea that thoughts create feelings, I was like, that is not true. Feelings obviously create thoughts. I'm having the thoughts I have because of the feeling. But I was so desperate. I was so brought to my knees. I thought, all right, well, I'll experiment. I'll try changing my thoughts and see what happens. And I mean, once it works, you're like, oh no. Then you have this huge responsibility, because even if your thoughts are only changing your small corner of life, you start to realize the ripple effect that everyone you contact is then in contact with a happier person. And I still believe in my show, 100% happy 88% of the time. The idea of that show was, people tell you how to be happy as if you can be happy 100% of the time, 100% happy 100% of the time. But because people treat it like a linear experience, you're unhappy, then you get to be fine, then you get to be happy. And I say, well, what if, since the true nature of life is more circular or spiralific, you took the two ends and you put happy and unhappy together? If you took the line and turned it into a circle, you see that happy and unhappy are so close together, and that fine is all the way down here, and you've got to schlep up all the way to happy. And fine is just, a contraction of flat line.
Yeah.
And I really did grow up in a family where everything, fine. We were fine, 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 fine. The worst things were just the higher the fine got. And so I was very emotionally, I would say my emotional intelligence, very low. And I would have a feeling, and this can still happen to me. I have a feeling, I'm feeling a lot. Oh my God, I'm overwhelmed with feeling, and I don't know what the feeling is. And I have to sit with my feelings and figure out why I feel overwhelmed, why I feel frustrated, why I feel like crying. It's not always, and even sometimes if I'm, if it's not a negative feeling, who cares then? You're like, I feel happy, great, who cares why? But with the happiness thing, I started to feel like, you had to be willing to be, and it's a joke number, but, you had to be willing to be 100% unhappy 12% of the time in order to get to be 100% happy 88% of the time. This is math. And that, how are the different ways you could take your 12% and all that. So that is to answer the question of negativity and shifting into being a more positive person. And I guess part of it was I just started to do some like research about life when I lived in the desert. And I stumbled across this fact that your happiness, we'll just call it happiness, which is such an inadequate word. It's almost as bad as journey. But your well-being, your peacefulness, this, positive emanating life force, let's say, it influences people, not just, it influences people like 6 degrees out, practically to Kevin Bacon. And so it started to feel like the world is so in trouble. And the one thing that you can for sure do is take care of your own energy field. And so I think that the words negative and positive are almost too simple, because I think the things that you're trying to do about your own energy field are get them in alignment, be in integrity, be, connected to your heart energy, understand your own energy, um, be able to express ideas and feelings articulately, work through problems with those in your inner circle. It took a long time for me to unravel the idea that like fighting was bad, and that to figure out like when there was an issue to sit down and calmly and peacefully work through an issue with someone I loved was so foreign to me, because of course conflict arises. We're human beings. You're going to have conflict, and if you have this idea of like positive and negative, a positive person doesn't have conflict, a positive person doesn't like have these kinds of, but if you think of like, being authentic and honest, and my therapist taught me this idea, when you're in a fight with someone, she said, listen to the music, not the words. And I just found that so helpful, both for myself and to listen to my own music. And because that is a place where sometimes you're telling yourself a story that can really get you in trouble. Well, she every time, and this always happens. And, this negative thing, whatever it is, your blood sugar's low and one thing tweaked you. And now suddenly this always happens. I mean, I know for me, and it's often late in the day, my blood sugar is low and I'm tired, and I'm overwhelmed with, I have executive malfunction in a brain of a life that needs executive functioning, and I get like sensory overload, and now suddenly like, oh my God, I'm never going to finish this project. What's the point of even doing it, but now I hear myself have a thought like that. This is the beauty of meditation. You do get in the practice of listening to your thoughts without necessarily reacting. I can hear myself have that thought, and I still maybe am feeling not great, but I'm able to say like, is that true?
That's awesome.
Is that actually true? Because it might not be. I mean, I know you don't feel great right now, but is it true what you're telling yourself? Might not be. We lie to ourselves all the time.
That comes with serious practice. So you've obviously been doing yoga and meditation for a long time as well.
Yoga, a really long time, and meditation about 6. I always I would come in and out of meditation practices, and I never really found one that stuck. So there was always too much to do. I mean, you go in your heart and you say this thing, and then there was one I was doing that was like tetrahedrons and the things and the shapes and the auras, and I just had a lot of assignments to do in these meditations. And then a friend of mine who was producing my podcast went and trained as a Vedic meditation teacher.
Ooh.
And my boyfriend said, oh, well, now we've got to let him teach us, because he went, and I was like, no, I've already done so many meditation practices. And then I was like, we have to. And I was like, oh, fine. And then I really didn't want to. And when he gave me my mantra, Vedic meditation is essentially the TM practice, but, the original version of what the TM practice was the ancient version.
Ooh, I did not know that either.
It's basically you're given a mantra, and you do the mantra 20 minutes twice a day, and that's it. That's like the whole instruction. And when you get in, but there's a week you have to, have lessons, and there's other questions and whatever, but it's not a complicated thing. And when I got my mantra, I just started crying. I was like, I don't like this mantra. I don't like, it reminds me of, this person who I don't like. And then my teacher was like, well, this lets me know that it is the right one. If it's making you cry, it's obviously the right one. I was like, how can that be? I don't like it. Why can't I have a mantra I like?
Imagine that was the mantra. I don't like you or something.
No, it was just like, it's 2 syllables, and it reminded me of a certain name. And then I started doing it, and lo and behold, I love this practice. This practice is the greatest gift I've ever received. I mean, it's so simple. And for someone who's an overthinker, and you're like, Beth, an overthinker? I can't believe it. She can't stop talking. This is impossible. But, it's such a relief to just simply, the instruction is you pick up your mantra as if it's a flower petal, and you just keep returning very gently to the mantra. What if you fall asleep, Chris? Oh, well, then I guess you're supposed to be sleeping. I mean, it's just the simplest practice. Is there a perfect posture to do it in? No, there is not. You sit in a comfortable position. It's not, it's like, it is not a zazen, sit on your, with, they're hitting your back because you're somehow slouching. It's like, okay, your neck shouldn't be, more than 45 degrees or your body will think it's sleeping. But, besides that, it's like very, very simple. And it's been 6 years, and it's very, it's always hard to track. Like, so you do your yoga and you do your meditation and you do your writing, and you go to some meetings and you do your therapy, and maybe you try eating differently. And what is the thing that's the thing that gives you the thing? It's like all of it. It's all of it.
Yeah, it's what you do in your day as well. I want to do a part 2 with you and hear about life in the desert as well.
Oh yeah, let's do a part 2. I love talking to you. You've got great questions and you're such a curious seeker.
Oh, thank you. I'm going to play that to my parents. I appreciate it. There's one thing before we wrap up that I really wanted to talk to you about, because this pains me. This is one of my number one goals, is to create a pilot. Well, I've written a pilot.
Okay,
I want to have it made. I've written many pilots. I've written, I think, 6 or 5. I can't even remember.
Okay, good for you.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And then I hear this story that you've done this pilot, it's getting made, and then it gets canceled or doesn't go into fruition. Yeah. That made my heart sank. Tell me about that experience and how you recovered from it.
Well, it wasn't written. It was a talk, for me, talk format is, I have a pilot that I've written that is out now, that is getting good response, and who knows, maybe by the time this hits air, it's getting made. So, but the talk format I love, and it was a pilot for a talk show for MTV, and we made it with them, and it was a great experience. We had done UnCabaret for Comedy Central, and then William Morris asked, what do you want to do next? And I said, I want to do a talk show called The Couch. And what it is it's going to be people who haven't met. Because I had done Politically Incorrect a lot, and I was like in the green room, and I love the energy of people first meeting. So I said, what I want to do is I want to book people specifically like you're a host at a party, and you want them to meet for a reason, and then they're in separate dressing rooms, and they don't actually meet until they're on the air. So you get all the energy. Cool. And at that time, now there's so many podcasts and there's so much talk, and it was a more virgin territory. This idea that you were going to actually talk. But even here, I'm promoting my book, So You Need to Decide, available on every audio platform. It's like, this was really supposed to be like talk that was just pure from the heart. And so, and we did this pitch thing. MTV had a pitch contest almost at the House of Blues, and you came in and everybody did these very, anyway, we had projection. We had gotten producers we had auditioned producers, and I got to listen to producers pitch me how they would do the show. It's so much fun. And then we went in and blah blah blah, we made this thing, and I love this show so much, though. It was really a true passion project, because it was talk that was, so for instance, we would have we had Kids in the Hall. We had Scott Thompson from Kids in the Hall and Mike Mills from REM, and I had them talk to each other about being one member of a creative group and what that was like creatively. And they ended up talking about money, and how money was the reason Kids in the Hall split up, and it was also the reason why REM had stayed together. And it gets so deep, and there were all different pairs like that were connected for various reasons. And then it was everybody, go around town and everybody's like, oh, I heard your thing's so great, and then it's announced in Variety, and then one day there was just a call like, it's not happening. And that is just like a bad day. It's just a very, very dark day, especially when you then find out they're doing a talk show with somebody else, and it's a boy, and blah. It was just bad, bad. And we owned it, and we almost sold it to Bravo, and didn't, because they didn't, I don't know, there was a focus group, and one of the ladies was like, I don't like her wig. It's like, it's not a wig, it's my actual hair. But all right. I don't know, I'm sure that's not why Bravo didn't make
can you
it,
imagine that's the actual reason?
Sure, but it was just like that. You read these little things stick in your head. Anyway, that ended up becoming a project that was so interesting. It wasn't just me. I mean, as you go on in life, you start to take things less personally. It feels very personal, but everybody had these pilots that got made and then never shown. And people would go off and leave UnCabaret and be like, "Oh, I'll see you in a few months. I'm going to make my pilot." And people had all these development deals, and people would be so excited, and then they'd come back tail between their legs like, it's not going. And I was like, well, let's do a show that's called The Other Network, and we'll show all the pilots that didn't get made, and we'll hear the stories behind the pilots. And it ended up being such an interesting show, because not only did you see the shows, and it was interesting because some of them you go, yeah, I kind of get why. I mean, I like, even though you might have liked the pilot, you're like, but would I have watched that in a series? Some of the best pilots, you're like, yeah, I could see why that wasn't a show. And then some of them were great, and it was just, people got caught in executive shuffles, and all sorts of things happened that prevented great pilots from becoming shows. And sometimes they were ahead of their time. Sometimes, yeah, all sorts of. Judd Apatow had 3 that he had made that didn't turn into series.
Him,
So
he's
you
like the
really,
guy that makes all of them.
yeah. So I mean, but he left TV and went back into film, and through doing the film, then has been able to do the TV. But there's no guarantees for anyone. One of the most beloved and famous was a Conan. Conan O'Brien did one that was called Look Well, that was Adam West as a detective, and it's so many classics. So in a way, it is an example of turning a failure into something that flourished in its own right, and being able to take all these so-called failures and turn it into, it was a successful run, and we toured it, and it almost became a DVD thing, but then we couldn't get music rights to one thing, and that was sort of heartbreaking. But this is Hollywood. At a certain point, you go, "Oh, that's what Hollywood is." I see. Okay.
Well, I'm glad that you could see the many positives from the pilot side that would still crush me. And yeah, I'm glad that you can smile and laugh, because that takes a lot of work. Even in my mind, I can't even see that. So
Really? Okay. Well, you just know.
I can see the pilot happening. I can't see me handling the pain of it not happening.
Well, one of the things is you start to become like, oh, it's not my only thing. When it happens when you're young, you're like, this was my thing. This was the thing. This was the thing that's the thing. And if it doesn't happen, then what's the thing? Because this is the thing. And then you start to realize, like, oh, well, actually, now I'm probably a better writer because I did that thing, and now there's another thing. The hat trick is if you can get paid to do work that you love, and you can get people to see it, and it's at all successful. That's a amazing success.
Yeah.
If you can do work you love with people you love and people don't see it, that's also kind of a success. And if you can do work you love with people you love and get paid, that's there's all sorts of levels. You start to realize, like, maybe one of the goals is, certainly one of the goals is to connect with an audience, which you're doing here with your podcast. And one of the other goals is to get paid to do the work, which I don't know what your, financials are on a podcast, but some people do, some people do. And one of the other things is to actually connect with an audience. And that's one of the beauties of live performance. So there's all sorts of levels of it.
I think that's really awesome. And also, this is just a note to me, and I'm speaking out loud. Like, when I first pitched one of my shows, which was terribly underwritten and it wasn't good, and that's not me being self-critical, I pitched it to a lady who's probably one of the biggest producers in Australia, and she's got all the Netflix connections, and she actually sat with me and had a meeting. And
wow, that's a success.
Yeah, it was. But at the time, because we view success as has to be made, I'm so grateful that she actually took me in, even though she said no, and that's fine. I wouldn't have been able to succeed. It wasn't ready. And she was very kind, and she spoke to me. So that has actually made me a much better writer because it didn't go ahead. So it's
amazing. But also, she took the time to give you the notes. which
Yeah, I'm very
is,
surprised. I don't know why she did that. It's very
well,
uncommon
she
when you
must have
probably go to
seen
tell.
something in it, or you, or I
I
mean,
don't know. Maybe it was so bad. She's like, oh, I need to call this guy in because no,
no,
I
she
don't
either
know.
liked the idea or the title or you. There was one line that she loved. I mean, people don't
Maybe.
take that kind of time.
Maybe I'll get her on the podcast and force her to buy it. But what we're going to do now to wrap up the podcast is
Okay.
do a rapid fire segment. So the
Oh,
first thing that springs to mind, I'll just ask you a few,
okay.
and we've answered some of them, but we'll see what pops up. What has been your special ingredient to work all these years?
Desperation. No.
That would be a good one.
What is curiosity and courage.
What are you most proud of?
Um, I mean, I guess on cabaret, the longevity of it, what it took to stay doing it, and but it's funny when we did our 25th anniversary show. Um, it was the cover of the LA Weekly, and I had actually written the cover story, and it was a beautiful cover. And I was very grateful that, and it was, anyway, the day it came out, I went to get the paper, and I'm standing there, and the guy was just delivering the paper as I reached to get them. And it was just a day. I wasn't, it was the early morning, and I wasn't, at all glammed up or, and I took the paper and I said to the guy, the newspaper guy, I said, "That's me." And he said, "No, it's not." And in some ways, that moment is so real for me because in some ways, Uncabaret was so much about the group and being the person who could put the group together and being something that's beyond yourself. Um, I don't know, maybe on cab.
I think that's awesome.
Maybe this podcast is the thing I'm
Thank
proudest
you.
of. I don't know.
You're too kind, but I think
And
that's
maybe the book. I mean, in some ways, the Uncab, because it was long and it was the most innovative and it took the most, all of those things. And it was political because of the whole idea of unhomophobic, unxenophobic, unmisogynist. And I feel like it made the biggest difference. But in some ways, the book, because I feel like there's the most, more me in it. And I don't.
I think that's very cool. And we've kind of like spoken, we've tippy-toed around Uncabaret. I will plug it at the start and explain what it is, but also just to add to it the rawness of it as well, and people speaking their truth and not being like forced to do the standard like comedy set as well, and how every time it's a completely different set or it's new. I think that's also a credit to your success in that arena as well.
Thank you.
What would you do if you knew you could not fail?
I assume you'll trim the dead air.
It's always awesome.
I'd be a singer. Who doesn't want to be a singer?
That's true. That is true. I wish I could.
All the things I do. I love so much. Maybe I'd take maybe a year and write the book.
As in a new book?
Oh yeah. The
Oh,
memoir.
okay.
The memoir, which I'm very hungry to write, but you've got to write it. I'm not. I would get famous enough so that somebody would pay me to write my literary memoir if I couldn't fail.
Or you can get like a ghostwriter and just add
No, I want to write it.
No,
I love
know.
writing.
That's awesome too. I'm just joking. Any advice you'd like to give to people who want to try something different or new, but perhaps a bit fearful of doing so?
Oh, sure. Yes. Everybody's afraid. Don't just give it no credibility. Just, don't value your fear. Don't put more value on your fear. Don't give it any, don't give it the power to rule your life. Honor it. It's, your fear has usefulness, but don't let it drive you. I've heard it said, don't let your fear drive the car. It's a passenger, not the driver. Yeah, just don't and learn to understand your fear. Learn when it's protecting you. Sometimes you're not ready. sometimes your fear is telling you, like, gather more information, gather more skills, do it tomorrow. Today's not the day. But over a period of time, don't let your fear rule you, and let your fear, um, be kind to your fear. Don't try to beat it up. Don't try to make it go away. Don't try to shame it. Don't feel ashamed about your fear. Everybody's afraid. Just don't give it the seat at the head of the table. Make it eat in the kitchen.
Would you consider doing a TED Talk, given all of the stuff that you've uncovered within yourself?
I can't believe you're asking me this. That's exactly what I'm working on. It's right on my list for today, TED Talk. I'm not kidding you. I'm working on it right now.
Well, I think you said a lot of things that you could add to it as well. So kudos to
A
you.
lot of things that are already in it.
Oh, very nice. You're just reading a script that's on the top of the monitor.
No. I mean, these are things that I think about. So it's, there's a TEDx thing that's about certainty, and I'm working on that.
Oh, that is very exciting. So the last question before I ask how people can get your book and follow you and all of that cool stuff, what is the one question I should have asked you?
Who does your hair color? You asked so many good questions. There's no great question that you left. I don't know. You asked plenty of questions. You shouldn't have. You succeeded in asking me so many deep questions. I can't think of one thing.
That is awesome. We'll do our part 2, and I have to hear about all of your cool adventures. So
that'll be fun.
It'll be very exciting. Before we go, how can people buy your book, keep up to date with you, and all of the amazing things that you're doing?
Such a good question. On the book, it's an original audiobook, so you can get it everywhere that audiobooks are. So you need to decide, and you can use your free Audible credit on it, and you can also easily give it as a gift through Audible. And but everywhere. I mean, if you want to support your independent bookstores, it's at Libro.fm, and it's available in some libraries, I believe. But Amazon, Amazon is so great because all the reviews are on Amazon, and if you like it, and review it, Amazon and beyond. My website, bethlapides.com, has links to all of those places. You go to the So You Need to Decide page on there, which the front page will take you to. And I believe we call the front page the home page. So there you go. My being in touch with, I'm Beth Lapides, BETHLAPIDES on Twitter. There's a hyphen between Beth and Lapides, underscore between Beth and Lapides on Instagram, and I don't know why I made that decision. It's the worst decision of my life. I regret it every day.
Oh, really?
But I'm fun on Instagram, and I would love you to join me there. And originally I was a book artist and pictures and a visual artist, and I love Instagram. So that's that, social media. And I have an email list, and if you get on the email list, we're supposed to call it a newsletter, I think now. Newsletter. Don't call it an email list. That's boring. Cut that out. Please edit that.
I'm not going to.
My newsletter, which I do like to write something upbeat and deep about. It's sort of a deep kind of dive usually into the now, and and shows and books and links come in that as well.
That's amazing, and they're all in the episode notes below, so people can check them out. Thank you so much. I'm excited for this part 2. I feel like we could speak for another year and we'd still have even more questions. You're amazing, and we'll chat soon.
Michael. Thank you.
Okay, where do we begin with this one? I found Beth's take on knowing your story really fascinating. Her words, "Stop trying to live your best life and just live your real life," really spoke to me, as it seems we as a society are always trying to live this incredible story, but sometimes we just need to be. By recognizing where we are and understanding it deeply helps us identify what changes that we need to make in order for us to move in a more positive direction where we can live our best lives. Further, when Beth was discussing the concept of knowing our story, she inspires us to consider who we are, to know our story. This doesn't mean creating false narratives, being rigid in our identity, or saying, well, this happened to me, so therefore I'm this. It's simply about unpacking, nurturing, and allowing oneself to grow and blossom into our best version. So in short, Beth is encouraging us to work at and comprehend the deeper aspects of ourselves, to see the blessings in our life and the experiences that have come from it. This allows us to be better equipped to deal with life's challenges through this self-awareness, and she says we'll be able to see the blessings in our lives and the experiences that will emerge. Also, as a side point, Beth's story about not originally getting her pilot made was crushing, but hearing how she turned this so-called failure into a success was incredible and empowering. Her ability to learn from it and grow is something I just find so inspiring. I'll leave you with this epic quote by Colette Baron Reid. There is a surrounding to your story and then a knowing that you don't have to stay in your story. If you like this episode, share it around, tell your mates. It really helps grow the podcast and spread the positivity and love.
Thank you for listening to the Funny and Failure podcast, exploring the deeper side of comedy.